Ohio's Secretary of State Frank LaRose warning expanded mail-in voting could lead to, quote, logistical and fraud problems. Good thing he's not tweeting that. He has reasons to be concerned. Twitter, if you're listening. In the past week, a former elections judge in Philadelphia admitted to ballot stuffing for Democrats. The NAACP in Paterson, New Jersey, wants a city council election do-over because of rampant voter fraud. And a West Virginia mailman stands accused of changing party affiliations on ballots. In the past several election cycles, Heritage Foundation has documented 1,300 proven instances of voter fraud, more than 1,100 convictions. And joining us tonight is Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, and one of the most knowledgeable people in the country on the issue of voter fraud. And I'm sure that you had to be more than a little chagrined to hear the rather pious Twitter statements about the president. I mean, I cannot even imagine what what's his name, Jack Dorsey, the precious idiot who leads that organization. Who does he think he is?
Well, Twitter came down on the side of a partisan, illegal move by the governor of California to send ballots willy-nilly to everyone, quote, registered to vote, which would include, under Newsom's own rules, people who have died or moved away who are still on the registration rolls. So when the president raises concerns about that, he's right. And when Twitter says those concerns are unfounded, they're wrong and they're misleading people. And I tell you what, Lou, if the governor of California is illegally going to be sending out ballots, those ballots may end up never getting counted under law. So if you want your votes to count in California, if you want the rule of law to prevail on Election Day, we want to stop dead this plan by the governor to blow up the elections, at least in California.
Well, and we
which
know
is what we're trying to do with
all
the
over
lawsuit.
the country.
Well, yes, and
Right,
other states
right.
are pushing harder on it, but it's a major, major issue.
It's stunning stuff. I just, I cannot. What is the president's recourse here? He's taking up the section of the FCC regulations, trying to get responsibility rather than immunity for big tech and social media platforms. What more can be done? They come right back the next day and act like they are a left-wing activist organization.
Well, that's what they are. And Section 230, the law the president's referenced, people have talked about changing Section 230. I've always been of the opinion, and the president now seems to be of the opinion too, that the law didn't need to be changed, that reality needed to be recognized, that these companies were acting as publishers as opposed to neutral parties just allowing people to post on their bulletin boards. When you start telling people what they can and can't post outside the typical forms of unprotected activity like violence and pornography, and you start saying politically you can't post that, that's publishers. And publishers don't have the protections that the Twitter and Facebook and Google monopolies do. So the president's highlighting that really protection, they've given up their protection, and so people who were victimized, they may get cases now.
Right. Well, this is the time for an end to these immunities that have been created, whether it be in civil law or criminal. It's time for people to be held accountable for their actions and their malign acts. This is certainly one of them against a president of the United States. I want to turn quickly to the release of these transcripts between Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and General Michael Flynn. What do you make of them?
Well, no wonder they've been hiding him for so long, because they show not only that Flynn didn't commit misconduct, but that he should get another medal. They show that he was able to persuade the Russians to not escalate in a tit-for-tat fashion a battle with the Obama administration. They had kicked out some Russians, and Flynn's like, don't go do whatever you want to do in terms of just make it an equal one-for-one, but don't escalate it in a way that's going to require us to keep on escalating it back and forth. And that's exactly what the Russians did. And so Flynn didn't do anything wrong in that regard. In fact, it reads like diplomatic communications between obviously the Russians and the incoming administration. The fact they were spying on them and the fact that transcripts exist, to me, are evidence of a crime. They should have turned the tapes off as they were listening to Kislyak as soon as he started talking to Flynn. They had no business monitoring the communications of the Trump campaign. Right. And, of course, they knew they had no business because on January 4th, they concluded, the FBI did, there was no viable case against Flynn, and that CYA memo by Rice suggests they had no case against Flynn. They all knew he did nothing wrong, yet they ambushed him and they tried to put him in jail based on false pretenses. Well, it is a scandal beyond measure.
A scandal beyond measure, and every one of them ought to go to jail, period. There is no question whatsoever. These people are absolutely evil to have done this to a man who stands absolutely blameless of everything they could even conjure up, fictionally, to charge him with. Let's turn also to, speaking of conjuring, Emmett Sullivan. Continuing against this man who's been so wrong for 3 years. Emmett Sullivan, can he be removed from office? Is that just simply a faint fantasy on my part? Or is there any way in which the Justice Department and the judiciary can actually bring the hammer down on a man who would be so irresponsible and ignorant from the bench?
Well, I guess in theory he could be impeached. That's not going to happen with a Democratic-controlled House. The court should order him to dismiss the case. He is playing judge and prosecutor at the same time, which is contrary to the American system of justice. I don't understand it. I mean, we've been before Judge Sullivan more than many in this town. I've been in his courtroom often. Our lawyers have argued before him often. He brought in all these Clinton email witnesses in the middle of the campaign. Judge Sullivan's case that allowed Judicial Watch to figure out the contours of the Clinton email scandal is as much a contributing factor to Hillary Clinton's loss as anything. So to see him go after Flynn like this in this with this judicial adventurism, it's difficult to explain and disappointing to see, to put it mildly.
Tom, as we wrap up here in about 30 seconds, Lindsey Graham thinks it'd be a boffa idea for all of the Republican judges who've been appointed by Republican presidents who are nearing retirement age to resign now and be replaced by Republicans while they still control, apparently, the Senate. Have you ever seen a more defeatist, too clever by half recommendation by anyone?
Yeah, well, you know, the Senate isn't doing much else, so they might as well just confirm judges. The other problem that in the Senate is that they've been successful in confirming judges despite the obstacles from the Democrats. They've got to get the appointees in the administrative agencies. That's been unconscionably slow, and the reason it's not happening is because the Senate leadership basically works 2.5 days a week.
Tom Fitton, as always, succinct to the point. We appreciate it. Tom Fitton, great American.